This is Codified Wisdom. Conversations with leaders sharing what experience has taught them and what they know now that they wish they knew earlier. Hosted by Eric Eager, CEO and co-founder of 4Impact Data.
You're in a brand new sector.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think when you started, there was no special needs, autism, robotics,
No,
neuroscience.
there was one research robot out there that was used in a lot of autism studies, but it was never going to be durable enough to survive in like real classroom environments and things like that. So, we had to build,
So,
in survivability, safety, all these other things that weren't really part of it. And so, we were pulling in addition to other roboticists, toy industry safety people and all kinds of stuff like that.
wow. But you're going through this, and you've told me stories. I mean, and we're talking. You're in studies and this and that. But the human stories of you've shared with me stories of parents where their child had never spoken a word
Yeah.
and would come home and talk to their parents for the first time ever because of their interaction with a Milo or a Jimmy or I know you had different versions.
Yeah.
Tell me about, because as a fellow entrepreneur and innovator and stuff, uh, when I talk to kids and young kind of upcoming entrepreneurs, and I talk about all they see is the end of the rainbow, the pot of gold, and all that. And what I always tell them is that innovation is a code word for lots and lots of failure.
Mm-hmm.
And but you gotta have those points where, and you had to have points where you're banging your head on the desk going, is anybody going to get this? Is this really working? Have I made a just horrible mistake in doing all this? And then bam, you get a use case, a symptom, a signal. Talk about some of those like milestones where you got, hey, I got a story back that it really had an impact on these kids, and the human stories of you're building this with the purpose of helping these kids. What other stories can you tell me about when you started to get like, hey, this is having an impact? What are some examples you can think of where you came back and go, I'm getting it. This is worth the fight. This is worth the grit. This is worth going and talking to your friends at government legislatures, which is a different exercise.
Yeah. I mean, to your point, entrepreneurship is kind of a roller coaster in a lot of ways, and there are very frankly a lot of pretty low lows at times kind of along the journey. But with what we were doing at RoboKind, the really incredible part of it was those outcomes. And I think you alluded to one of the earliest ones that I really saw, and everyone on the team saw that was pretty incredible was we were working through a study basically and kind of honestly early test of our first generation curriculum. And one of the lesson sets was basically greetings, how to say hi to people effectively. Um, Sounds simple, but there's kind of a lot of components to it that you build up towards. And one of the kids in one of our earliest studies, he was 14 years old, was essentially nonverbal, grunted in response sometimes, but really never used his words. And after two lessons or two attempts on our kind of greetings or early greetings lesson, went home and said hi to his parents for the first time at 14 years old. And um, that was I mean, you want to talk about motivating, in terms of seeing an outcome like that, that early when we felt like we were still just kind of flailing and throwing stuff against the wall to see
Yeah.
what the right path was. That was truly incredible. And then, throughout the years beyond that, another one of my favorites, we were developing an early childhood reading curriculum for these special needs classrooms. And one of the kids who, this was up in rural Indiana school, kid was 5 years old, had been through some of our social emotional learning, behavioral skills curriculum. And when he started there, he was, I think he was 5 years old. He was nonverbal, not potty trained, a lot of behavioral issues, some, kind of violent tantrums, things like that. And after 6 months in the kind of the core program, he the tantrums and kind of behavioral issues subsided pretty dramatically to what I would call normal levels of 5, 6 year old tantrumy sort of stuff, not these extreme meltdowns and things like that. Learned a lot of self-regulation, but still they thought this kid had an IQ of about 55 and kind of like was a goal, just get him through the system kind of kid.
Yeah.
That school was one of our test sites for our early childhood reading program. And this kid went from, in basically a year, behavioral issues, nonverbal, to, I mean, fully learned to read really quickly in like a few months, which just opened up so much other incredible stuff for him. And by the time I actually was able to get up there and meet him in person, I'd seen some like videos and things like that because had other folks up there doing site visits periodically. I mean, this was just a happy, cheerful, normal 6 year old kid. I mean, autism, whatever. I guess I've been around a lot of that.
Yeah.
But I mean, just in terms of it rising above what anyone ever expected of this kid and so quickly, really, just showed that there's so many people out there with extraordinary capability. And the question I always ask is, how do we get to them, support them, and kind of unlock their abilities? I don't really, the deficits are something to help with, to assist with, to, teach around basically, to develop these, processes to kind of support and supplement.
Yeah.
But it's really about opening up and unlocking whatever their true capabilities are. And it sounds a little corny to say it, but um, it's when you get the opportunity to see it and see it, somewhat at scale, you can't, you never lose that passion for it, regardless of those difficult times and the slow periods, or like, when COVID hit, obviously everything was in
Yeah.
turmoil. We had a physical product based thing, and suddenly no one's in the classroom. So we
Yeah.
had to pivot and develop, virtual characters and all kinds of other stuff and just figure it out. And a lot of that stuff, in the early parts of that, we were developing and just giving away for free to, help and support in whatever ways we could. But I mean, at the end of the day, seeing those kinds of outcomes, just kept me, my team, all of us going through, some of those really, difficult and low points, because we knew what our mission was, what our objective was, and the outcomes of that were truly life-changing for other individuals and other people and their families and the community of people that support them.
I mean, that had to be, um, and I can feel we're inventing something, we're trying to get something going, and you're like, is this going to work? And now you start getting, hey, but you get those breakthroughs, you get those things. Talk about like the support mechanisms you had, because you had to, if you had a dog at the time, hopefully the poor dog, you didn't come home and kick the dog. The dog's there to help you. What had, from a business perspective, how did you, who did, mentoring, support mechanisms. Who was there to kind of keep going? Hey, you're having a rough day. Hang in there. Keep doing this. What lessons learned and what kind of support mechanisms did you have surrounding you to keep the grit to get up and dust yourself off and do it the next day?
Yeah. I mean, my dog at the time was part of that support definitely, and he was with me all the time, literally in the office every day too. But I mean, my father was hugely supportive, and he hadn't done this sort of thing before, but he'd built businesses and all of that, and so obviously a lot of support there. But then also, over the years, I've been really fortunate to meet and work with, work for, and have work for me incredibly talented and experienced people, and it was always my objective to, find those people, whether they were kind of, formal mentors, advisors, just bring the best people in house and, letting them do their thing, but also learning from them. I've always tried, and I think I said it explicitly, and I know I wrote it explicitly, while we were starting RoboKind, that I was in that business until I wasn't the right guy anymore. And so, that was the objective, right?
Yeah.
To build an organization that wasn't dependent on me, uh,
Yeah.
and to really grow that. And in order to do that well, you need to find those incredible people who, both directly and indirectly are supporting you. On the manufacturing side, I was really fortunate. A guy I knew who had interned at another robotics company, and we'd met at a few conferences when I was younger and stuff like that, had started his own robotics company, Sphero, and which has done very, very, very well. And when it was time to start looking at manufacturing and things like that, introduced me to the folks he'd worked with, who were this incredible group out of Hong Kong, true tier one manufacturer, not kind of fly by night, whatever, had been around for 40 years, make, probably a third to half the toys I grew up with were made in their factories. And I promise you, you have 20 items in your house that, were made in, probably the same facility I made these robots in and all of that. And they were also very unusual for an organization like that, willing to kind of almost in a venture-like way support early stage and startups that they kind of saw promise in, believed in, and also thought they could learn something from, and kind of helping us build our products. And so, like, on the manufacturing side, I got plugged into this ecosystem of, I mean, a giant tier one global scale manufacturer who was willing to allocate engineers, production managers, all this stuff for us and towards us, without, I mean, they paid for most of our prototyping. They, fronted us funds while we were raising more money to build out the tooling. They did all these other things, and I spent, over a decade, I spent, more than 4 years over there in their facilities, working with them, learning from them, teaching them how to do certain things. And, I think that's one example. But, even on the curriculum side of things, right? We had these incredible autism experts that were helping us develop curriculum. And then as we realized that schools specifically were going to be a real market, going from just the pure autism folks to finding incredible curriculum people who knew how to kind of really structure this in the right way that worked in these environments day to day, not just the technical aspects of, this is evidence-based, research-backed sort of curriculum, but how do you
Yeah.
structure that? And artists, to help make it look and feel good. And, it's like you build these incredible teams, whether they're employees, contractors, outside groups, and figure out how to really kind of learn from them while you're working with them has really always been my approach. Um, you know, I'm I've become knowledgeable and in some areas even an expert, but I think over time I've really gotten to a point where I think one of my best skills and skills I try and when I'm speaking to college classes or things like that is like, do not try and do everything yourself. Find the best people, learn from them, learn these processes, learn whatever you can from them. And also, when it's time to kind of move on or things are changing or you're learning differently, there are ways to kind of part ways and separate with people in healthy ways where you can maintain relationships and it doesn't have to be kind of, bloody or
Well, that
bridge burny, if you will.
no, and that's the theme that I've seen and heard from people is that um, having that common purpose. So it wasn't the dollars and cents. I mean, obviously you got to pay the bills. You weren't
Yeah,
operating a nonprofit.
yeah,
As a tech company entrepreneur, yeah, well, let's just say nonprofit, a lot of
yeah,
investment in the tech.
yeah,
Um, but people were, and I've learned from shameless plug for Abundance 360 and some of these groups and Exponential, EXO. They said that the common thread of highly exponential growth companies is that you have to have a transformational purpose that pulls in people within your sphere of influence and ecosystem because they believe and want to be part of the purpose that your company is doing.
mhm,
Um, now let's uh, two things. One is I want to get back to um, the our Antarctica robotic story of how in the world did you get involved in that? And then we're going to jump ahead a little bit
mhm.
to kind of the next thing that you're working on and many of the ventures that you're now exploring and doing things
Yeah.
with.
So yeah, with the penguin stuff, I had some friends and some guys I'd worked with who another who were at another firm, and they got a piece of kind of project to build some crazy robotic camera rigs for this BBC documentary that was basically filming, you know, penguin colonies, and they were, also just physically nearby, and so they were building all these, crazy robots, and got was kind of hanging out honestly a lot over there because they were doing more animals. I was doing humans basically. Lot of cross pollination and learning and stuff like that, and got the opportunity to help. I think at the beginning pretty informally on just problem solving some of their devices and mechanisms and things like that, and then jumping in a little more to build out these really cool you know penguin robots, and with these incredible roboticists and sculpture people and artists and things like that, and put these together and deliver them basically and go get to be a part of that whole thing. Um, and I don't know. I mean, it's kind of a fun, weird little thing, but these weird humanoid robots, animal robots, museum installations, all these other things kind of put me in weird places and gave me access to weird opportunities. I mean, even I know you want to talk more about that, but there's so much kind of around that that I think
Yeah.
is honestly even more interesting. I think like one of the first robots I got to do at Hanson that then opened up some of these other opportunities with this stuff is we were building a singing humanoid robot named Julio for the musician David Byrne. Um,
Okay.
and
I just saw him down at Jazz Fest, as a matter
Oh,
of fact.
nice,
So
nice. Yeah. And so, like that was literally the first project I got to jump in on there and got to, sit there and put, both, I was, I think 20 years old or something at the time and was, both assembling these crazy humanoid robots, learning all this stuff, learning to animate these robots because a lot of the robots we built were, pretty autonomous. This was more sculptural performance basically. So, we had songs that David Byrne had recorded and I had to sit there for, basically as an intern sit there for months sitting in front of this robot and a mirror with recordings of these songs and getting, honing in these movements and all this other stuff in a real performance, not a programmatic way. And that then kind of taught me the value of creating these really clean, intense, beautiful kind of performances and looks and feels. And we got into it. It started out as basically robot head bust up, and
yeah,
we were then sticking it on just a mannequin body. But then the static body was a little rough, and we were like, we need more movement, and so
yeah,
built shoulders that could kind of shrug and bop with it, and all this other stuff, and then hands that worked, and it got more and more complex. But then I got to like go to Spain and hang out and put all this stuff in, and then later that introduced me to a bunch of other artists and musicians and actors and other folks who wanted to kind of be a part of this, and then that led into all this, some other
and then it's
weird
just
TV production, Ridley Scott documentaries I got to be a part of, and all kinds of other weird stuff.
wow. And you keep in mind because everybody's seeing that today
Yeah.
with all the AI and the robotics that everybody's afraid is, everybody's afraid of Terminator, and that, it's
We
gonna.
we built a robot for the TV show Terminator: The Sarah Connor Chronicles, so I got to be a part of that universe, and yeah,
So but you're doing this, I mean, years before and where we're at today.
yeah.
And so you're seeing this, you're seeing the possibilities, and now, um, you're working on these things, you're getting introduced to these crazy stories of all the different, introductions and artists, and you're using robotics and neuroscience to help kids. And then, and I want to point out one of the things you went into one business is you had the end in mind of, I can't, I'm going to build this, get it to a point, and kept the end in mind because a lot of entrepreneurs I know, they come in and they just kind of haphazardly. So you were intentional of while you're building it because you knew that you had other bigger things and you also wanted, so this was just going to be one part of the portfolio.
Hmm.
Um, Now today, AI, robotics, it's, you're seeing it in manufacturing, you're seeing it, Boston Dynamics, you're starting to see all those things coming. As of today, looking forward, what is your vision, and what's intriguing you right now? Like what, you've got this incredible history where a lot of things could grab your interest.
Hmm.
What's grabbing your interest today? And I know that you had a venture fund,
Hmm.
and so you work with some pretty interesting ventures, and you work with a lot of different things. What's grabbing your interest today, and what gets you excited about looking forward?
Yeah, I mean, there's AI, the current generation of AI is obviously exciting and booming, and it's huge. I'm always, and I think this is just a lot of the way I think, I'm looking to kind of, separate the wheat from the chaff. Like what is the pie in the sky, kind of hopes and dreams of what these technologies can do versus the reality of what's applicable today, especially if I'm looking at, a potential company as an investment to be an advisor, et cetera. Like what's real versus what's, kind of the pie in the sky BS that, is maybe achievable, but what can we do today? And so kind of through that lens, a lot of, I think, how I filter right now and look at different opportunities and deals are what, what are things that, whether it's robotic space or pure AI space, like that are kind of automatable, achievable today that, in a lot of cases, reduce out difficult labor, dangerous labor. I've been spending a lot of time looking at kind of, high labor, dirtier industries, not with the goal of replacing people, but with the goal of improving productivity, making things safer. So like, I think we've talked about it before, but like I was looking at this robotics company that's doing a parking lot painting and striping kind of robot and automation. Like those are dirty jobs. They're, mostly done overnight in, big environments. In the summer, even at night, it's
Yeah.
miserable. You're on these asphalt surfaces. You're working with dirty stuff and people that literally don't want to see you, which is why you're doing these jobs at night. But, also there's labor issues, right? It's a lot of these groups and companies I've talked to in the space. It's
Yeah.
not like the bigger issues are not can they get enough work, but can they actually get enough labor to support the work? So
Yeah.
can a technology like that be a force multiplier for the guys you can get, and same thing, another company that I've looked at and one of my LPs is an investor in does a robotic crane basically for construction job sites that moves heavy, cinder block and big bulk materials and things like that around and can kind of, you know, like 10x the build, the speed of build of, a traditional wall, whether that's for a building or exterior of a property or things like that.
Yeah.
It sounds relatively simple, but it's one of those things, what's the net outcome? You can build faster. So a given construction company, for instance, can take on more work. You're putting less of the lifting bulk heavy materials on the individual laborers, on the guys actually building this stuff. So there's less strain and repetitive injury. There's, all kinds of benefits across the entire chain down from the individual, on the job site up to the whole business. And those are the things that kind of excite me. I've been doing humanoids for, a lot of my life in kind of different aspects and ways. I don't think those technologies are quite there yet. They are in some places, but I don't think
Yeah.
I think we're still a ways off in terms of call it the physical AI, not just this generative AI stuff. The physical AI that can interact and understand the real world.
Yeah.
We're a ways off from just like humanoid robots wandering around outside in the real world doing stuff for us. Is there application to put them in, factories and warehouses, things like that, controlled environments, repetitive tasks, just, with the new generations of AI have different approaches. You don't have to rote program everything and they're more adaptable. But like the things that really are exciting me more now are these kind of simpler niche things that really support and help in these dirty and dangerous spaces, because we've got a lot of have to be a little more look at the macro kind of within especially the US right now. we need a lot of labor support if we're going to be doing more of our own building,
Yeah.
manufacturing, et cetera. A lot of, and part of this, I guess, is my heavy manufacturing background. Like, very selfishly, I'm gonna want to manufacture more product in the future. If I don't have to spend huge swaths of my life on the literal other side of the world away from my family and friends to do that, I want to be able to do as much of that here. I've worked with incredible people all over the world, but very selfishly, I want to build it here. And so things in the labor and manufacturing space have been really piquing my interest lately. And then other types of, back to the non-physical stuff, the pure AI, just things that automate out the repetitive nonsense that most of us do and have had to do in our careers and jobs day to day that are not our area of expertise and skill sets and things like that. I mean, I've tried to automate as much in my life as possible for a very long time. Now the tools to do that, the barrier to entry are getting so much easier and easier, and the types of things you can automate are just expanding that, it's like, can you get your, excellent salesperson away from having to do any data entry? Can you integrate note-taking things and put the right kinds of templates in place to filter them through and all of that so that they can do what they're best at, get on the calls, push the
Yeah.
deal forward, push the opportunity forward, et cetera, like, and, take a lot of the nonsense off of the job, which, I mean, a lot of what you're doing too in the CPA space is really, it's that was kind of the starting point, and I think you've gotten beyond that into more incredible things. But like, a lot of it starts with, you're never going to really get to that value point for potential end users and customers and stuff if you don't make life easier for them along the way.
Absolutely. Well, as always, I always get involved in these conversations, and I know that I watch some podcasts now that are hour and a half
Mhm.
long because the topics are so fascinating. But what we may want to do is we'll probably have to split this episode into
Sure.
two, and then do some future conversations. We can start
Yeah.
talking about what some of these things you see coming down the pike. But
Yeah.
as I always do when I wrap up these episodes now, is I always like to ask people, I have suddenly created a time machine, which you may have actually helped build it. And in this time machine, and you can go back to the younger Richard somewhere along the line in some milestone in your life, you can go back, and now the wiser Richard can go back and talk to the younger Richard. Where would you go, and what would you say to them to encourage, inspire, or whatever you want to tell the younger Richard?
I think it's as simple as ask for more help earlier. Um, Make sure, don't undervalue the and kind of market aspect of it. If you're building a business, you have to generate revenue. And I think for a lot of the stuff I did early, I kind of lucked out and fell into just some demand. But as I've done more complex and harder things, I've learned, the hard way and, early on, and I'm getting better at it. Not going to say I'm perfect at it, but, figure out your sales and distribution models and things like that as early as possible. Talk to your potential customers and end users and make sure you're hitting the mark on what they want and need. And they won't always be able to tell you everything. So, be willing to prototype throwaway things, which again has gotten so much easier recently, to show them a concept rather than just talk it through with them. I'm a big fan. It's a little old at this point, of the Google Venture sprint process, which is basically go from concept to, user testable prototype in a week. And it's a really incredible process, and I've driven a lot of people through that, sometimes kicking and screaming. But you learn so much so quickly, and there's a lot of other processes like that. That's just the one I like. But just move as fast as you can, be willing to prototype, throw away things and concepts so that you can show rather than tell. And that will help you figure out what the real product is much earlier in the process, and who your customer is and how you're going to sell it. And having those conversations early, asking for help, bringing in as many of the right people and specialists as early as possible in whatever way you can, whatever funding or revenue level you're at. Just like get don't shoulder it all yourself is really, I think, a lot of what it comes down to. And as I, if I could go back and teach the younger Richard that, at 13 years old, certain things I've done that, have worked, and others that haven't worked out might have worked or might have been bigger than they were had I kind of tried to shoulder less in the early days, and honestly sometimes been too cheap on my spend in the early days. Um, things like that are really the types of things I tend to reflect on when I'm jumping into the next new thing, like, and trying to do a post-mortem and evaluate, whether it worked or not, how can I
Yeah.
do it better the next time, and faster, more effectively, and get there in a better way. And it shortens that roller coaster ride a little bit. You still have the highs and lows, but it ends up, you get there faster, whether it's going to work or not. And I think that's kind of the important thing.
Oh man. Well, as always, I tend to go long on these things, but the stories, it's just hard to not continue the conversation. So, uh, man, again, thank you for sharing your journey. I have a strong suspicion we will coming back for episode 2, because you have, and which I always appreciate, you have probably the more unique perspective of what the next, what it looks around the corner in the world, from AI and robotics and a number of other things. So, hey, for those watching, hey, appreciate, again, thanks for listening. We hope you grabbed a couple of nuggets of information to help you get work further faster, and stay tuned for the next week's episode. So, otherwise, be safe, and we appreciate everybody taking the time to listen to us.
The collective wisdom and lessons learned from these conversations have been the inspiration for the business guidance system at 4Impact Data, helping CPA firms grow client advisory services.